Top of the morning, everyone.
No matter where in the world you are, this is
Real Speaks.
Welcome back, everybody, to our current events show. This time, we're going to do something a little bit different. Usually, we just go through the regular stories for the week, and we give you a whole bunch of stories. But today, we just want to focus on two very important areas and stories that have happened recently, and we want to kind of expand on each one of them.
That's right.
So the first thing is we want to talk about student loan debt, because something very interesting has just happened.
Yes.
In the world of student loans, and then we're going to talk about Obamacare and the healthcare system in general in America, and we're going to bring into this some of our own personal experiences and take it from there. All right, so there's been 4 different posts that have come out on different news sources with this one story that's really caught our attention. This is a headline from Forbes.com, why $5 billion worth of student loans may be wiped out.
This is huge.
Here's another headline, $5 billion in student loans may be dismissed because the lender lost the paperwork.
That's in Business Insider.
And here's one from the New York Times. As paperwork goes missing, private student loan debts may be wiped away. So we're going to actually go through and read some of this article to give you all a heads up on what just happened. It just came out a couple of days ago. Tens of thousands of people who took out private loans to pay for college but have not been able to keep up payments may get their debts wiped away because critical paperwork is missing. The troubled loans, which total at least $5 billion, are at the center of a protracted legal dispute between the student borrowers and a group of creditors who have aggressively pursued them in court after they fell behind on payments. Judges have already dismissed dozens of lawsuits against former students, essentially wiping out their debt because documents proving who owns the loans are missing. A review of court records by the New York Times shows that many other collection cases are deeply flawed, with incomplete ownership records and mass-produced documentation. Some of the problems playing out now in the $108 billion private student loan market are reminiscent of those that arose from the subprime mortgage crisis a decade ago, when billions of dollars in subprime mortgage loans were ruled uncollectible by courts because of missing or fake documentation. And like those troubled mortgages, private student loans, which come with higher interest rates and fewer consumer protections than federal loans, are often targeted at the most vulnerable borrowers, like those attending for-profit schools. Now, let's discuss this a little bit.
Yeah.
First, if you're listening to this show, we're gonna tell you a little bit about our personal experiences. So I'm about 40 years old. That's my generation.
Yeah.
And I have a master's degree. I spent 10 years of my life doing higher education in America. I went through all these systems. I have a degree. I have an associate's degree from a community college. I have a bachelor's degree from a state college. Those were both campus-based colleges, brick and mortar colleges. And then I got my master's degree from an online college, and they were all regionally accredited and all that stuff. And then I went into the job market world, and I climbed the ladder a little bit, but I entered into a dismal market. I have a whole bunch of student loans. I represent a particular group of people in America around my age group.
Yeah.
Millions of kids.
Yeah, absolutely millions.
Right?
Yeah.
Or we're not kids, but people around my age. Then you've got my parents' generation. My mom's about 20 years older than me, and so she is like a hair's breadth away from a PhD, right? So she's gone through all of the education system and has that. Her generation was different than mine, because when she was my age, going into college around 18 or so, there was still such a thing as free college. Free.
Right.
Like you could go to college, a community school someplace, and you could get a free education. About 10 years after her generation was college age, they started to charge for colleges. I mean, well, there was always Ivy League schools, right? So those were always expensive, and you had to pay for them. But at least there was an option of having a community college that you could choose to go to for free or very, very little money, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So about 10 years after her generation, people who would now be around 50 years old, the climate then was you could go to school and work a part-time job and make enough money from your part-time job to completely pay off your tuition
Right.
while paying your living expenses for an apartment or whatnot, so that by the time you graduated from college, you had zero student debt.
Yeah.
That's unheard of anymore, but that's the way it used to be. It used to be that affordable that you could, and you could get a job part-time to make that much money so that you could live modestly and graduate from college.
Yeah, that's right.
Then you hit my age group, okay, or our age group. Tivon's around the same age. He's a couple of years older than me. And we got stuck into something that happened in the system. The tuition, the cost of college started going up and up and up. And the reason why is because there were guaranteed federal loans that would give students enough money to pay these tuition fees.
Right.
And they were going out of control. And then these colleges started springing up all over the place, and they had a degree in everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a degree in origami or some ridiculous thing, right? Like there was just, pay us lots of money to get a degree, and none of those degrees guaranteed that you would get a job.
Yeah.
But that was what they sold people in our generation. It was a lie. Okay,
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I appreciate my education. Tivon has an education as well. He's also former military. So we appreciate our education. However, the system got really corrupted.
Within the span of a generation.
Right. So that's why this news that just came out is a really big deal, because we're starting to see.
Yes, the unraveling.
Yeah.
What this story means is that there are a large number of people between, if we look at the total number of private student loans that have gone out to students at least since before 2010, as stated later in the article, we're looking upwards of around $20 billion total. Now, the article only cites $5 billion of that. But if you look at the total market of the private student loans, again, these are private student loans. If it's $20 billion, it's probably more than that. But if it's $20 billion and the average student was paying between, let's say, $20,000 to $25,000 for their education, we're looking at potentially between 800,000 and 1 million students. 800,000 private student loans between 15 different trusts. And what that means is that because of the way these student loans have been treated as far as ownership of the loans between these private trusts and institutions, they can't prove legally that they have ownership over these loans if they decide to take these students and take them to court. So that's what basically this means, that there is now a legal precedent where these private institutions try to go after students for loans for repayment, or if the student can't pay back the loan, to basically make a claim to garnish the wages or what have you, so that they can recoup some of that money. And if the student actually, or the graduate, but then the student actually try to go to court and challenge that claim, it's in favor of the student.
So let me try to help explain how this works. And I was personally involved in this kind of a battle in my own financial life when I was younger. This is very much like, let's say, credit card debt, right? You have a credit card. Many credit card institutions are handing out cards to kids when they're like 18 years old and they have no idea how to manage money. It's like, here's this card with this money, and oh, don't worry, you'll pay it back one day, and then it has this huge interest rate, and then you can't pay it back, and then it goes into default, and then what happens is the credit card company that initially lent you the money, they will write off your debt, okay?
Right.
It's the same thing now with these massive student loans. We're talking huge amounts of money that students have taken out. So the original lending company that lent you the money in the first place, when they can't get any money back from you, when you stop paying your loans and you go into default, after a certain period of time, I don't know what the time is now, it might have changed. It was usually, 6 months, 9 months, about a year, somewhere around there, they will write off your debt. And what that means is basically they can write it off their books. They can say, oh, it's a bad debt. It's kind of like a tax break. They don't have to, it looks good for them on their books. It's like they can eliminate your loss. You were a loss to the company. It's just all done in a nice big math equation. And the company that lent the money to the student, they don't care about it anymore. They're done. They're done with you. You're a bad debt, and that's it. But then they will sell that debt to a collection company that will buy your debt for pennies on the dollar. So they basically kick the can down the road.
Yes.
I like to say, picture a staircase. So the original lender, they kick the can, they sell your debt to a collector for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
That collector, so now you're on the second step down. That collector tries to collect from you. They will call you all hours of the day. They will do everything they can to get the money from you,
Yeah,
and
threaten
anything that you give them. Let's say they bought your $10,000 debt for $100 from the original collector. So they only spent $100 to get the right to collect on your debt, right?
Yeah.
So if they get anything over $100 from you, that's profit for them and their company.
Right.
Right? So they try to collect it from you. Let's say time goes by and you don't pay them either. Then the collector sells your debt to another collection agency that's kind of like a little lower on the rung. So it's like the top collection agencies, they have a little more class, but by the time you get down, because they'll sell your debt, then they'll sell your debt again, and they'll sell it again. Now you're at the bottom of the ladder.
Yeah.
So you are literally dealing with a collection agency that is like the scum of the earth. They have no rules, no regulations.
Right.
They're just barely legally eking by. They're probably not legal, right?
Yeah.
The more time that goes by, that's where your debt ends up. It's already been written off several times by all the collection agencies before it, and of course by the original lender.
That's right.
The problem is that when you're down here and you've got this bottom level collection agency trying to collect a debt from you, they do not have your original paperwork that proves or validates that you actually owe the debt or that they actually own the debt.
The proof of claim.
Right? Proof of claim or validation of debt. Because when the original creditor, like the original contract that you sign that says, I promise to pay this back, that would be the original creditor up here at the top of the stairs. When they write you off, they don't care about you anymore. They don't pass down all of the paperwork to the collection agency that they sold the debt to.
Right.
They're too busy for that. They don't care about
Years
that.
have elapsed.
Right? They just write you off and get on with their executive corporate lives. They don't care. So they throw away the paperwork.
Yeah.
By the time you get to, maybe they don't. Maybe the first collection agency actually has a copy of your original signed contract proving that you own that debt, right? But the second or third or fourth collection agency certainly does not have that paperwork. So what we're seeing here in this story is that what happened was students are or former students who owe private student loan debt that have gone into collections, they've gone into default, they are now bringing these collection agencies to court.
Yes.
To say, prove that you have the original paperwork that says that I owe you anything.
Yes.
Because I didn't sign a contract with you. I signed it with the company that already wrote it off as a loss. And in the court, if you can't validate that debt, if you can't show the original paperwork, then it gets thrown out of court. So that's what's happening when there's $5 billion
Yes.
worth of student loans being erased or dismissed, or they just magically disappear into a numbers game because they cannot produce the original paperwork.
That's right.
I hope that makes sense. This is a big deal, everybody. Now, the reason why it's a big deal is because it's the unraveling of the system.
It is.
Okay?
Yeah.
But we're going to go back a little bit. We're going to actually dig into some. Let's go to the beginning of where this all started going corrupt and where it all started going wrong. There are many people that call this student loan crisis. Student loan debt is like another bubble, just like the subprime mortgage crisis was a bubble back in 2008. That is still looming over our heads. We're still waiting to see the fallout from that because they came up with things like QE or quantitative easing into infinity to just drag out the inevitable. So we're seeing the same thing with student loan debt, and you have millions of students that are of my generation, or a little bit older, a little bit younger than me, that are going through this where they have these huge debts.
Right.
They cannot pay them back, and the job market does not offer jobs where
Right.
you'd even have a chance of paying them back. And the majority of students that are in default right now are over the age of 60. So that shows you that you take out these loans for life.
Yes.
Let's just get some definitions here. And let's bring a little bit of biblical concepts into this as well, as far as God's law. Let's talk about usury.
So usury is the illegal action or practice of lending money at an unreasonably high rates of interest.
But here's just what a few Bible verses have to say about usury, just putting it in context. In Exodus 22:25, it says, "If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury."
In Ezekiel 8:13, hath given forth upon usury, and hath taken increase. Shall he then live? He shall not live. He hath done all these abominations. He shall surely die. His blood shall be upon him.
Also in Deuteronomy 23:19 through 20, it says, "Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury."
So here's the thing. Although the definition of usury that I just read to you dealt with the practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates of interest, in truth, in the biblical sense, traditionally, usury is banned, as we've just read. The concept of usury in itself is not a practice that one Christian would do to another.
Yeah, and just one more verse here. Leviticus 25:37 says, "Thou shalt not give him thy money upon usury, nor lend him thy victuals for increase." So there's a whole bunch of Bible verses that basically talks about how usury is not a good thing. It's not a godly law.
No, it's not.
Right? Of course, we have interest. That is something we have in our banking system, and that kind of came about relatively recently if you look at society as a whole. It's not, interest and usury really is not that old. Maybe
After the
100 years or so?
it's been around for a few hundred years, but I mean, during the Dark Ages, the Roman Catholic Church banned usury. But I think it wasn't until the 16th or 17th century was it adopted as part of the financial system in the West.
And one more concept I want to bring up just to give us a balance here is this concept of canceling out debt every 7 years.
Right.
Now, if you're looking at things like the statute of limitations legally in today's society about how long it is that you can legally collect a debt, it is actually 7 years. And after 7 years, it's supposed to fall off of your credit report or your credit score unless they illegally try to re-age it by redating it somehow.
Right.
But you're supposed to not be able to collect debt past 7 years. for all debts except student loan debts. Okay?
Very interesting.
Because that is different. That has no statute of limitations. You can collect on those debts until the person dies.
Wow.
Okay? That's why you have people in their 60s that are still not able to pay off their student loans. It will drag out for the course of a person's almost their entire life. But let's just put this in perspective. In Deuteronomy 15, this is what it says. This is God talking to his people. At the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact of it of his neighbor or of his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother thou hand shall release, save when there shall be no poor among you, for the Lord shall greatly bless thee in the land, with the Lord thy God given thee for an inheritance to possess it. Only if thou carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord God, to observe to do all these commandments, which I command thee this day. For the Lord thy God blesseth thee as he promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow. And thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. So clearly,
Right.
that's the King James Version. If you
Yes.
want, you can always read that from another version. But clearly that states every 7 years, cancel all debts.
Yes,
God says so.
absolutely.
That's basically what that is. So when we're looking at these modern day lending laws, they're ungodly laws. We're bringing this out because this is what we're seeing in America when it comes to the student loan crisis. And it's happening across the board for millions of students. I want to bring a concept to the forefront now. It's called indentured servitude.
All right.
Tivon, what is the definition of indentured servitude?
Basically, it's a person under contract to work for another person for a definite period of time, usually without payment, but in exchange for free passage to, for example, a new country. Now, during the 17th century, most of the white laborers that came from Europe and settled like in Maryland and Virginia came from those places as indentured servants.
Right. So, if you have a student loan that in order to get a college degree, you had to take out this loan, it's a guaranteed loan from the federal government. Private loans are a little different, but you have this massive debt. So they say $27,000, but that's not the figure.
That's very conservative.
That is extremely conservative. It is not the average $27,000.
Double that, maybe. Triple that.
$100,000. By the time you pay it
Quintuple
off
that.
with the usury interest rates, you have to double or triple the original amount.
And I think those figures for $5 billion and with the $20 billion, I think it's more than that also.
Right, and in some cases, it's very reasonable to say, you know, a lot of these students will have $200,000 to $300,000
Yes.
worth of student loan debt by the time they pay it off when you incorporate all the interest in.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's a huge amount of money. What
Yes.
kind of job is going to pay that kind of money, right?
So,
it's hard. It's
well-
hard to pay that off.
Well, okay, so if we look at the old definition of indentured servants or indentured servitude, it was the laborers came from Europe, for example, to a place that they thought was opportunity. But there was a caveat to attain that opportunity. You had to work for somebody, the owner, a landlord, for a certain number of years
Right.
under a contract. And the landlord is supposed to honor that contract, that after you've completed so much work and so much labor within that period of time, you are given a release and a right and a title to basically, you're released from that program that got you to the new world in the first place as a servant, and you're no longer a servant now that you've fulfilled your time. Now, there's a reason why we're drawing a parallel with that to what's going on here with the student loan crisis.
Let's pull up a few statistics. I found this very interesting report. There's a lot of them out there, but I'm just going to read from this one report. It actually comes from Northeastern University. All right, this report is called The Indentured Generation, Bankruptcy and Student Loan Debt. It says a generation of Americans have borrowed heavily for their education, and hundreds of thousands of them are deeply in debt. Some 37 million Americans owe a total of approximately $1 trillion in student loans. They constitute an indentured generation, as many of them will be burdened with student loan debt for much of their lives. Some will eventually pay their loans, many will default, and others will receive loan modification or partial loan forgiveness. By and large, their participation in the credit economy will be severely limited, and that's the truth, okay? Members of the indentured generation who are in particularly dire circumstances will turn to bankruptcy for a fresh start, quote unquote. But with few exceptions, student loan debtors will not get relief through bankruptcy. This is a big deal.
Yes, yeah.
The relief that is provided for most debts under the United States Bankruptcy Code is not available for student loan debt. Because of this, education debt servitude will last a lifetime for tens of thousands of indentured generations.
Okay, so in this article, in this paper, it's a PDF actually that we're pulling up here from Northeastern University School of Law. So they've titled the generation of people indentured generation.
It's a term now.
So this is a generation that has paid or promised the successes of having a degree,
Yes.
of going through the higher education system with the promise that there's a job on the other end with a nice salary waiting for them if they're willing to put in the years, time, and large amounts of money.
Oh, yes. It's a sales pitch that is aggressively pushed, and we're gonna show that in a bit. Keep going.
Needed to get to the other side.
Yeah.
That, okay, I'll put myself through the mud. I'll go through these hurdles, whatever it takes to get that degree on the end, because that degree means I'll get a job. That's the message. That's the message that's been planted, especially over the past 30 years.
Yeah, and we're part of the generation that was fed that line,
Yes.
that bought the line,
Yeah.
hook, line, and sinker, and, molded our lives around going for higher education. I want to continue reading this article just a little bit more because there's some more statistics in here that I think are important to bring out.
Okay.
It says some experts warn of a student loan bubble, while others downplay the potential of a mortgage loan style meltdown. There you go, right?
Right.
Nonetheless, the numbers associated with education debt are staggering. 37 million Americans, some 19.9% of American households, owe student loans. The average debt load for a four-year college graduate in the class of 2010, this is 7 years ago,
And this
right,
is the average back then.
was more than $25,250. Okay, so that is like the lowest of the low, and it's gone way up since then, right? Students in graduate school borrow much more, averaging over $43,000, getting a little bit closer to the truth, right?
It's interesting.
And individual loan debt exceeding $150,000 is not uncommon.
Okay, so basically those numbers that we were giving you earlier they're much higher. The average is not 25,000, and that number that you just read was back in 2010. And people on average borrowed much more
Yes.
than that.
Yep, many middle-aged and senior citizens have also have student loan debt in addition to parents and relatives who have co-signed student loans. So it's not just the student, it's the parents who co-signed the loan that are responsible for this burden,
I see.
right? So it's the whole country.
Yes.
It's huge, right? As of 2012, less than 40% of student loan debt was in repayment status according to the original terms, so there's that bubble, right?
Yes, yeah.
And a recent study finds that approximately 21% of current student loans are delinquent or in default. I'm going to keep reading. Compounding the problem is that new graduates are entering one of the worst job markets in decades. The unemployment rate in 2009 for student graduates was 8.7%, but by 2010 it was 9.1%. Unable to find jobs, unprecedented numbers of young people are moving in with parents. They call them boomerang kids. Because they came back, right?
And this is unbelievable.
They're postponing marriage and children. They're working unpaid, temporary, or part-time jobs and taking similar steps that would have been unthinkable for prior generations. As a result of financial stress, student loan debtors experience high levels of personal depression, family dysfunction, and adverse health effects, and are delaying or foregoing marriage, children, and major purchases. While we were reading through that and reading about the state of people's lives, the state of the family, the huge decisions that people are making where they're not having kids, they're delaying marriage because of all of this financial stress,
yes,
it brought this to mind, just as a side note.
Okay.
This is a book called The New World Order. It was written in 1989 by Ralph Epperson. And they're talking about what their plans were for changing society.
Okay.
Right? The elite who wanted to change society. And this part right here, it says the New World Order will include changes in the family. Homosexual marriages will be legalized. Parents will not be allowed to raise their children. The state will. All women will be employed by the state and not allowed to be homemakers. Divorce will become exceedingly easy, and monogamous marriage will be slowly phased out. The workplace. The government will become the owner of all of the factors of production. The private ownership of property will be outlawed, and religion will be outlawed, and believers will either be eliminated or imprisoned. There will be a new religion, the worship of man and his mind. All will believe in the new religion. It reminds, especially the part about the family,
Right.
making divisions in the family, making people not want to get married, not want to have kids because of financial burdens. It adds to that. It adds to that pressure and makes society more malleable to their New World Order agenda, I feel.
Yeah, I can see that.
So
Basically, it's a slowdown and a halt to the economy.
I'm going to read this last paragraph, then we'll stop there. While federal repayment and loan forgiveness programs can help some borrowers, for many debtors, these measures fall far short of addressing or crushing burden of student loan debt. But there is an effective means to address the problem. Consumer bankruptcy under the code adjudicates millions of dollars of debt each day, but the code excludes education loans from discharge unless the debtor proves that paying the debt would result in quote-unquote undue hardship. Now, what that means is that the debtor has to go to court and prove undue hardship, and very few people
Yes.
have what it takes to go through the system to fight it on that level. Most people just let it go,
Yes.
and they don't show up in court, and they don't fight it, and by default, the creditor
Wins
wins the case.
wins the case.
Right? So what we're seeing with this story that just came out is a really big shift, I think. It's a big
Yes.
turnaround.
Yes, that's right.
And we're also wondering if it's, the system's way of saying, well, we can't formally come out and do debt forgiveness, so we'll just lose the paperwork.
Yes.
This is an older film, older meaning it was put out in 2010, but it's got some, this was the beginning
Right.
of the bubble, and this was it's a documentary done by PBS Frontline called College Inc. So let's just take a brief look at the intro.
On Frontline,
It's education. For profit.
business is booming.
You thinking about going back to school?
They'll find you a loan,
It was just such an incredibly simple process.
give you a diploma,
We educate the students that traditional higher education has given up on.
but what are the costs?
I really am at a dead end, and the student loans are going to keep mounting and mounting and mounting.
The danger is a kind of fast foodization of higher education itself. This is an online university. This is what it looks like.
Correspondent Martin Smith investigates.
You've been in office now for a year. What have you done to stop this?
College Inc.
What we just showed you were numbers of young people that have been aggressively pressured into going to school to get a degree and forced, almost forced, to take out massive student loans. So it's a sales pitch. They're pushing salespeople to pressure young people to become slaves of indentured servitude.
In a lot of these cases, these universities are not accredited. They're not regionally accredited.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the degrees that were promised or offered to these students,
They were like diploma mills. The degrees were
Yes,
worthless,
they were
and they got
worthless.
out into the workforce, and they did not have the skills necessary to do that nursing job or
Absolutely.
or whatever they went to school for. But even with the accredited universities as well, basically the problem is across the board where you're sold something. College is big business, and you get guaranteed loans from the federal government to give the students the money that they need to go to school. And that's why they can just keep on hiking up their tuition rates higher and higher and higher
yes.
in order to attend school. Tuition is a fortune these days compared to what it used to be, because they're allowed to do that because the federal government will guarantee loans
Yes.
so that kids students who might not be able to ever afford paying those loans back, they'll guarantee that they'll give them the loan to give to the school.
Yes.
So it's like a rigged system. So let's just take a look at some of the sales tactics that are used by the school's recruiting agents. It's
Right.
just like a sales office. Check it out.
Thank you for calling DeVry University.
We wanted to find out more about how the enrollment process works. We'd heard complaints about call centers and employees called enrollment advisors using high-pressure sales tactics on prospective students. Then we got hold of this internal email from Argosy University. In it, a director of admissions is writing his team of enrollment counselors. Create a sense of urgency, it says. Push their hot button. Don't let the student off the phone. Dial, dial, dial. Tammy Barker was an enrollment advisor at another for-profit school, Ashford University.
I didn't realize just how many students we were expected to recruit. And the amount of pressure that they put on you to meet these quotas, I think challenges anybody's integrity.
In a letter to Frontline, Ashford's parent company, Bridgepoint, says they don't have quotas. But Barker says she was instructed to make 150 calls a day and close on at least 12 students a month.
If your numbers started dropping, trainers would come around and start telling you to up your outgoing calls anywhere from 300 to 450 a day to meet those quotas, to get those applications. And they used to tell us, dig deep, get to their pain, get to what's bothering them, so that way you can convince them that a college degree is going to solve all their problems.
Another former Ashford enrollment counselor, in a submission to the Department of Education, wrote, "We are forced to do anything necessary to get people to fill out an application. Our jobs depend on it."
Thank you for calling Ashford University.
Bridgepoint says Ashford has zero tolerance for unethical behavior.
The focus is to start the student. Whether they're academically ready, whether they're financially ready, they need to start class.
Ray Campbell worked as a financial aid advisor at the University of Phoenix. Once a student was recruited, it was his job to hook them up with a loan so they could start paying for classes as quickly as possible.
If I put on my report that the student's not ready and they don't start, I would hear it. I would constantly be pressured of why aren't they ready? Is there a way we can start them? What can we do to get them ready? Anyway, the focus was on this student needs to start, period.
Just weeks before this broadcast, the University of Phoenix replied at length to a list of written questions from Frontline. On the question of pressure tactics, they said, should we find an enrollment advisor misleading students, prompt action would be taken, including termination. In the same letter, they wrote, we are committed to financial literacy. Federal student loans are the lifeblood of the for-profit schools. Although their students comprise only 10% of the college-going public, they consume almost a quarter of all federal financial aid.
The taxpayers are essentially funding this industry. Something like 75% of their revenue comes from federal grants and loans. The University of Phoenix, which is the biggest for-profit, it now gets 86% of its revenue from the federal government, up from something like 48% 9 or 10 years ago.
The schools say they're providing opportunity, helping students of modest means pay for college.
We educate the students that traditional higher education has given up on. Traditional higher education has become a very socio-demographically elite group of people. If you're not wealthy or upper middle class, you're not going to get into a traditional higher education system. So the only options lower income students and working adults have is either to go to a community college, some of them can go to minority serving institutions, and our option is the third option.
What remains troubling is that on average, the debt load for for-profit students is more than twice that of students at traditional schools.
Unlike a public community college where a small grant will usually cover most of the tuition, for the for-profit colleges, the tuition requires substantial borrowing. So a student who drops out or who doesn't get a high-paying job, sooner or later they have to pay the piper, and that can mean tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans that they have to pay back.
That's what happened to me and many other people. All right, moving on to the next segment of our show. Tivon's going to tell us what he found in his research. Is Obamacare going down in a blaze of glory?
Not at the moment, interestingly.
Oh, okay. What's going on?
Okay, so the whole point of Obamacare was to create a universal health care system. And this system would be beneficial to those, even those with living below the poverty line and who had pre-existing conditions. Because in the United States, if you have a pre-existing condition and you're only, you're basically at the poverty line or below the poverty line, chances are you're not going to have a medical insurer put you on some program to where if something happens to you, whether you get like a life-threatening illness or an accident occurs, you couldn't get them to insure you. Mm-hmm. Okay, or the premiums would be so high that you couldn't afford it. So, in that regard, the expansion of the Medicare program through what is called Medicare Part D, the prescription expansion, and other similar things that were written into Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, basically expanded to where anyone who wants to apply for some kind of medical insurance can get it. So it's this giant, it's supposed to represent a national program. Now the thing is that the states have always had the ability to enroll in the program or not. And as it was of 2014, 38 states enrolled in Obamacare. And the remaining states had not. And now what has happened is that fast forward to 2017, there are sections of the populations that find Obamacare very unpopular. But the question is, do they find it unpopular that they want to just entirely repeal Obamacare? And the answer appears to be no. People find it unpopular. For example, they were promised that would it change their current program, their current Medicare setup that they had, mm-hmm. Or medical insurance setup. And many people were pleased with it, and they were promised no. And then when they actually signed on to Obamacare, they were let go from their current program. Because Obamacare completely restructures the Medicare system in the States, okay? So the reason why the Republicans are having problems, even with the two elected branches of government, with what to do with Obamacare, although they've spent the past 7 years working to, you know, repeal such things that would come through, are for several reasons. Because the Obamacare has parts of Medicare that has been expanded to include a larger group of the population, basically virtually anyone can apply now, that's wildly popular. And also, there are senators in certain states that voted for president, for the presidency, you know, for Trump, that they used certain parts, like the expanded Medicare that's under Obamacare, as a reason why they want to vote Republican. It was actually used during the election campaign. Mm-hmm. So there are Republicans who use parts of Obamacare as a reason to get people to vote. So this basically creates a split within the Republican Party on what to do with Obamacare. Now, President Trump wants to completely repeal Obamacare and replace it with something else, and has given the Republicans the time frame of basically from the end of July to August, during what is called the August recess, to basically come up with a plan to repeal Obamacare and to proceed forward from there. But when it comes to actually trying to implement it, they're going to have a difficult time for those reasons, because there are Republican senators that use some certain parts of it for electioneering and to gain the popular vote. There are four main reasons why the Republicans could not just simply replace Obamacare, at least not at this point. One, the Senate Republicans are deeply divided conference with a slim majority. Two, there's no clear deadline. The Republicans were trying to slip bills in secret before President Trump became elected, you know, during Obama's reign, basically, stealthily to try to repeal Obamacare. And a lot of these bills, the rollback would have been draconian, even challenging Medicare and Medicaid. Now, the thing is that a lot of the Republicans who weren't part of the initial group to create these bills didn't know about all the implications of doing this rollback of these secret bills. But now that they're trying to repeal Obamacare and make it popular as possible to do this, these secret bills are coming into view, what's actually in them. And there's a certain group within the Republican Party that are afraid that it won't get a popular vote once the other Republicans realize what's in these bills. So these are the things that are why there is a postponement of the try to repeal Obamacare at this point. This is basically talking about what the things that Obama promised in Obamacare that was a lie. Mm-hmm. That's not true.
Trump blasts Obama. He knew Obamacare was a lie. Tells the GOP, don't leave town until health care is done.
Yeah, that's right. So this is what Trump basically mandated the Republican Party to work on through August. That don't take recess. That's supposed to happen on July 29th. You're going to sit there in the White House. You're going to sit there in D.C. and iron this out to come up with a way of repealing Obamacare and coming up with a replacement. And
I'm sure that made him very popular.
I'm sure they love that. And Trump, in this article, there's also links to his recent video of him talking about the promises that Obama made in Obamacare. And these are legitimate promises that Obama did make that actually turned out to be lies. Okay. He was talking about, one of them was talking about the promise of the decrease in premiums, where in fact they've increased by $3,000 instead of a decrease by $2,500 per person. So obviously that's crushing the middle class. It's expensive, as as we know from some of our friends who are signed up onto Obamacare, have told us. Also, again, like I mentioned before, it was a lie that you can keep your current plan, your current medical insurance plan. And indeed, many people, as soon as they signed on, they lost their plan. Their plans were canceled, to their surprise.
Okay, so thank you, Tivon, for walking us through the Gordian knot that is the politics behind a healthcare system for Americans. Okay, so it's a big mess. What we want to do is we want to take this conversation in a more personable direction. Because we're talking about health and healthcare and money, right?
Right.
So for us, we understand that there are a wide variety of medical needs that most people have. You have people with pre-existing conditions, people who need certain medications to treat certain things. However, there is a huge body of people, of which we're a part of, those people that don't want to go through the medical system for things that they could probably do naturally for their health, okay? For me, I was raised in a household where we had a lot of herbal knowledge and wisdom, natural food wisdom, and anytime I ever got sick, my mother would try to treat me with herbs and nutrition and God's medicine, pretty much, right? Yeah. But, however, I do understand that in what's known as acute situations, right? Acute being that it is an emergency. It's something that needs immediate care. For example, if I break a bone, I'm not going to drink a cup of herbal tea. I'm going to go to the hospital to get the bone reset properly because there's equipment at that hospital that's needed.
That's right.
If it's an emergency, like you're in a car accident and you're bleeding, you need emergency medical care. You need the equipment that is there. Certain surgeries, you need medical care for that.
That's right. Okay.
There are surgeries that are needed. So there are definitely situations where you do need doctors and hospitals, which are very expensive, in order to save your life.
And that's why Obamacare is important here. When I mentioned before, there were 38 states that had signed on to Obamacare, but the others did not. A majority of the people who were unable to have any kind of medical coverage at all with any problems that they had were in the states that did not sign on to Obamacare. Now, the thing about this is what it means is, like you said, acute injuries. Or let's say even during the wintertime, certain states, the wintertime could be harsh. A lot of people can die.
Yeah, if you have a really bad infection.
You or your kids.
Right.
And if you're below the poverty line, then you have no medical coverage.
Right, it's a problem.
It's a problem. So, what you're talking about there, it shows that there is a need, at least as far as a nation, because a lot of nations actually have this.
Right.
Where there's at least some minimal standard, some minimal of something there for people who really genuinely need it. I did find some interesting statistics on the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation. It's www.kff.org. And these two statistics were the following. Regarding the appeal of Obamacare, I mean, again, a lot of people are, having signed on to Obamacare, are very disappointed with some of the lies that they've been told and how everything's gotten expensive. But even these statistics, in spite of that still only a quarter of Americans are in favor of full-out repealing Obamacare. And you have instead 71% of the public are more towards changing the policy, making changes to the current policy, to the ACA. And we know that there's a cross-section of Republicans are in there too. Because, again, we're talking about people who are the elderly, those who are working below the poverty line, a large swath of people who, under previous circumstances, would not have any coverage at all. Okay, and these are places like in the Midwest, and again, the winters in the Midwest can be very harsh. So when you take that as a whole, this does bring a human aspect to this. That this isn't just about dollars and cents at that level. And which is why the Republicans are kind of having this problem right now. We're trying to just all out repeal Obamacare.
So here's my limited understanding. Before Obamacare was enacted, I used to live in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
Massachusetts was one of the first states that had mandatory health care coverage. So as an actual resident living and working and paying bills and taxes in Massachusetts, what I understood that to mean was that I was required to buy health insurance unless I could find a job that would offer it to me, which is very, very difficult to find because companies, with the economy being as it has been, cannot afford to give health insurance to their employees. So usually you, as the employee, are left flipping the bill.
Mm-hmm.
If you're lucky enough to have a job, which at one point I was lucky enough to have a job that provided me with health care insurance, which I still had to pay out of my paycheck for. And also, one of the jobs that I had while I was in Massachusetts was working in the payroll department. So I was one of the people that was processing all of these paychecks and handling all of the health insurance premiums that people were paying from their paychecks, right? Because there's all kinds of stuff that comes out of your paycheck and all that gets processed. So I saw that hands-on. Mm-hmm. What I understood the mandatory health insurance to mean was that you were required to buy and pay for health insurance. Now let me tell you what some of those numbers looked like. And this is what people don't understand, okay? At the time, it was a household of 2 people, myself and my ex-husband, and we were required to spend $700 a month on health insurance, unless we found a job that would provide that for us, in which case it was $200 to $300 a month that we were required to pay out of our pockets in order to have health care insurance. Mm-hmm. The thing that was the most frustrating to me was that I didn't use 90% of the coverage that I was required to pay for, because I don't want to go for vaccines and flu shots and all kinds of drugs that they want to pump into my system. If I have a broken bone or if I have an acute situation, yes, I need the hospital. But I did not want to go for all of these mandatory things that they're trying to do, because I have always grown up with a natural health regime.
Right.
Which we'll talk about in a minute, because Tivon has experienced firsthand the power of a natural health regime when you're in a bad situation, health-wise.
Yeah.
But, so for me, when Obamacare came rolling around and the whole country was celebrating, saying, yay, everybody's going to have health insurance and it's going to be so wonderful, I was just looking at everybody with my head upside down like, don't you people realize what this means? It means you're all going to be required to pay for it. And it's a lot of money. Now, I was trying to look up before we did this show, because I can't find them right now, but I remember a whole bunch of people, my Facebook friends, were posting pictures of their health care premium bills when they started to all go up because of Obamacare.
That's right.
And some of these people had to pay close to $2,000 a month.
Yes, it was a lot.
To pay for their health insurance, for their Obamacare. And these, you know, for me, it was 2 people. When you have a family with multiple children, and pre-existing conditions and all kinds of stuff going on, right? Whatever your family's needs are, can you afford to pay $2,000 a month for health insurance?
Yeah.
No. Insane premiums, which kind of conveniently get left out of the conversation because, oh, I don't know how much it is and I don't understand it, so I'm just not going to think about it. So unless I'm incredibly wrong, this was my perception of what was happening with the country when Obamacare was brought in as this wonderful thing. For me, it was not a wonderful thing. It was a huge bill that I could not afford to pay to buy medical coverage that I never wanted to use because I personally don't believe in most of that medical system.
Yeah.
So let's see where it goes from here. Let's talk about some of that natural stuff, though, because we want to share with you a personal story that just recently happened between Tivon and I when it comes to taking care of our health. Now, we're both expats. We are living abroad in Morocco, and we have our business here and everything. And so it's a different country. There's different food, different water, different bacteria.
Yeah.
And we used to live in an area that was a very densely populated area. It was a big city area, lots of pollution, different public health and safety standards, I would say. It wasn't as clean as some cities would be in the States. So we got sick a few times because of some weird bacteria or germs floating around. I got sick a couple of times, and I had to go through my herbal regime of flushing my body out in order to heal myself. And I was sick for like a month each time, which was not really good, because usually I can flush it out of my system within a few days. But Tivon got sick. And I want Tivon to tell you, in his own words, what happened.
Well, I think this was sometime last December. And I had this bug, this inflammation in the throat, and with congestion, and I thought
fever probably.
It was followed by a fever, and my throat started swelling. So it felt like I had a sore throat, but then my throat just started swelling, and over the course of a day, it got to the point to where I basically was afraid to fall asleep. Because as I was swelling and I had this congestion happening, there's a lot of saliva and buildup and things like that. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't swallow without it hurting. It was like I was trying to swallow a Coke can or something. But basically, I couldn't fall asleep, and I felt as if I was to fall asleep, I would literally drown in my own saliva. It was very uncomfortable. So I remember I was trying to take all kinds of just things like aspirin and bicarb. We probably didn't have aspirin at the time, but I tried to take just singular things like a tea and a bicarb solution.
And bicarb, for the Americans, that's baking soda.
It's baking soda. Baking soda in like warm or hot water, because it's a good way of keeping the body alkaline. Anyway, that didn't do anything for this bug, and I felt terrible, and I was afraid to fall asleep, but I was really drowsy. And it happens that so I stayed up most of the night until like 3 or 4 in the morning, and you got up.
Something woke me up and said, get out of bed and go check on Tivon. There's something wrong with him. It was like an intuition, right? That's what you get when you have a partnership like ours and you're close to somebody. You just know when something's wrong, right? So I get up, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I go in and I see him Googling his medical condition, which is like the worst thing that anybody can do, because it's like, oh gosh, I'm gonna die, right? It's like it was, but he was really sick, and he couldn't talk, and he had tears coming down his face because he was in so much pain. So I called upon all of my herbal knowledge that my mother, God bless her, spent most of my childhood teaching me everything she knew about the body, about health, about herbs, about different properties of different herbs and how to use them, how to prepare tinctures, everything. And I went to work and I took everything that I had in the house, which were some basic ingredients, because it was 3 o'clock in the morning. So it wasn't like, oh, let's go to a pharmacy. Nothing was open. It was the middle of the night, and I was really afraid for him. And so I did a whole bunch of things in this case. I mean, I won't go into the details, but we had tinctures, we had teas, we had poultices, we had all different kinds of things that I made with basic herbal household ingredients. And I put him on a regiment, and I basically said, take 1 teaspoon of this every half hour, gargle with the salt water every hour. I made a list of a schedule, and he just had to sit there and he was just ingesting all of these different things that I made for him.
It was like 5 to 7 different things at one time. It was like a broad spectrum
of stuff that I had in the house.
Herbal things.
Turmeric and, you know, because we live in Morocco, so there's lots of herbs and spices that we get at the local market here. And a lot of those herbs have natural properties like ginger and anti-inflammatory and then germ killing as well, because I realized that he had an infection. I could smell that there was an infection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had to go through natural antibiotics. So he had like massive amounts of garlic and all different kinds of things. And I said within a few hours, you're going to feel a little better. And then within half a day, you're going to feel a little better.
Yeah.
And I got a little bossy because I was just like, do not, you know, you can't just take one pill and drink a cup of tea and say I'm going to be better when you're that sick.
Yeah, when I was thinking I could just take this one thing or this other thing and that would be it. No, I had to for that day, for the 2 days, faithfully drink these different things all at once.
So the thing is he was on a strict regimen.
Yeah.
And within how many hours?
Maybe 5 hours or so.
5 to 8 hours, I'd say. Within 8 hours, you were 75% healed and back to normal.
The swelling, the inflammation in the throat had just almost just vanished.
And within 2 days, you were completely better.
Yes.
And it was so dramatic.
This was this is probably the worst illness I had in my entire life.
Yeah. And you were a sick boy as a little boy. You had all kinds of flus and things, right?
Yeah.
So after this, he said to me, he had a renewed faith. Well, what did you say about the herbs and stuff?
Well, in my situation, I tried to think about what the medical equivalent would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only other thing I was able to find online dealing with rapid inflammation of the throat would have been like an antibiotic.
Mm-hmm.
And then even then, that wasn't guaranteed. So there was no equivalent I would experience other than drinking those natural herbal remedies that completely remove that condition within hours. And to look at the antibiotics, they were thinking maybe days, but.
Well, the thing is that I was trying to tell Tivon, because I had the herbal wisdom growing up, which he did not have. He didn't have the same experiences. I was trying to tell him that herbs are very, very powerful. It is God's medicine. They do work.
Yes, they do.
And they work better than pharmaceuticals or drugs in some cases, even though you could never say something like that because there's a there's a big Gestapo when it comes to big pharma.
Yeah.
But after this experience, Tivon became a believer because he said, I can't believe how fast that worked.
Yeah.
It saved my life. He thought he was going to die. He thought his throat was going to close up.
That was
and
terrible.
Within, just a few herbs from God's garden, and a regiment and some discipline and lots of prayer, of course. There was prayer as well.
Yeah.
But the combination of all of that stuff healed him so quickly and so rapidly that Tivon was like, that's it. I will never doubt the power of plants ever again.
I want to just take all those things that I took and put it in the blender and have it sit somewhere all the time.
Yeah. So from that day forward, I mean, I've been telling him everything I know. When we go out to the market together, I say that is chamomile, and that is really good for your stomach for all digestive problems. It has these properties, or peppermint is good for these things, or ginger root is really good for these things, just to give him the education that I was blessed with because of my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So there's alternatives to Obamacare.
Yes.
We'll see what happens with it. We hope that people don't get too badly penalized for not paying the Obamacare premiums that very few people could actually afford.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see what Trump's doing, and thanks for explaining the mess of the political situation.
Sorry, it wasn't easy.
Yeah,
trying to summarize this.
Because they've been using it for political purposes,
yes.
for getting elections and everything else.
Both parties have been using it.
Yeah, meanwhile, the actual people on the ground are having to deal with their health issues and having insurance problems that they can't afford.
Yes.
So, but you know what? Maybe it's a good thing, because maybe it'll make a lot of people turn away from these pharmaceutical things, because a lot of them are not good for you anyway, and to turn towards educating themselves about how to eat better, take better care of your health, preventative measures and learning about
Absolutely.
the power of plants. So,
Yeah.
well, with that, everybody, that's our Real Speaks for this week.
All right.
We have a fantastic show planned for next week, unless some huge event happens.
Yeah.
I won't tell you what it is yet. You'll just have to wait till next week. And until then, we'll see you
Okay.
next time.
Take care.
Bye-bye.